He's right behind me, isn't he?
Oh, man. I just knocked over my camera. I'm picking it up. Sorry about that.
Hello. Welcome back to my channel. Not usual intro because let's address the elephant in the room. I sound like this. Blame whoever did this to me at the trilogy tour. Anyway, ever since I started posting videos of my room on my other social medias, I always get comments pointing out, tiny little details of, people's niche interests that are on my walls and stuff, and it's really fun. But people specifically love to point out anything related to Mad in my room. And if they're familiar with my YouTube content, that's usually followed up by, oh, will you ever talk about Mad on your channel? And the funny part is, I did make a video about Mad. In fact, my very first video essay ever, which is actually about to celebrate its 2-year anniversary, was about Mad. If we don't count the LPS iceberg, that is, which I don't. That's a different format. If you didn't know about that video, I'm not blaming you, but it did inspire me to be like, okay, not a lot of people clearly saw that initial video anyways. I knew that, and I know that there's so much more that could be expanded upon, so I decided, why not revisit it? On top of that, there was also a recent trend on Twitter of people making fan-made Mad parodies, which definitely played a role in me making this video too, and inspiring me to talk about the topic again, because seeing Mad on my timeline in 2024 made me so happy you don't understand. I hear people discuss Mad quite often, a lot outside of the recent trend I saw. Usually it's just to emphasize though how awful it truly was.
What's Mad?
It's the terrible thing I was talking about!
But what I did in my initial video and what I want to continue to do in this video is give my thoughts or perspective as to what worked and what didn't for the show, as somebody who is Gen Z and grew up with the show and really liked it at the time, because I think it's so interesting to look back on. So without further ado, let's dive in. But we have to start at the beginning, okay? What is Mad? Because it's a lot bigger than just a short-lived Cartoon Network cartoon. Well, Mad was a satirical magazine founded by editor Harvey Kurtzman and publisher William Gaines. Mad would first be released in a comic book format in 1952 before making the transition to a more standard black and white magazine in 1955. And the idea for Mad really stemmed from Kurtzman's love for comedy, because when he started working at EC Comics, a publishing company that was founded by William's father, Maxwell Gaines, before he passed away, of course. His work for the company, though, didn't have to do with his love of comedy at all. In fact, it was more serious and focused on world issues like war. His approach to the war titles was more thoughtful than most stories being published at the time. With the Korean War raging and experiences of many fans in the military to draw from, Kurtzman told stories that examined the human price of war. But just because he wrote about these serious issues doesn't mean that Kurtzman was entirely a serious guy. He was far from it. He spent years actually illustrating humor comics. So although it's actually unclear from what I was able to research, who actually came up for the idea of Mad, Kurtzman wanting to combine his love for comedy with pop culture was definitely a big part of it. So he is often actually credited for creating the magazine, which is weird to say because in the long run, he did not stay with the magazine. He went to work on other projects and none of them were nearly as successful as what Mad would end up being. That being said, over the years, Mad has definitely had a cultural impact because it was groundbreaking for the time, considering this was the 1950s. And besides the magazine's impact, Mad is also best known for their mascot, Alfred E. Newman, which was inspired by a weird-looking figure Kurtzman happened to see with the phrase, "worry me not," attached. The name Alfred E. Newman was taken from a radio show hosted by Henry Morgan, and it was started as kind of a stand-in, I guess, but as Mad took shape, this character became recognizable, and it is known as a mascot of sorts for the magazine now. But with having, the impact that Mad did, it's not surprising to hear it only continued to expand as years went on. And by expand, I mean media was made for Mad. First with a sketch comedy show that began in 1995 and lasted for a total of 14 seasons, and then next with a second show, a short-lived animated show. Mad was a spin-off cartoon of the magazine of the same name that aired on Cartoon Network from 2010 to 2013. And I say semi-short-lived because obviously the legacy will never top 14 seasons worth of a show. Maybe it can. I don't know. I've never seen it. I couldn't tell you. We're not gonna touch it in this video. My point is 3 seasons will never compare to that, truthfully. As far as nostalgic Cartoon Network shows go though, this show is often forgotten or remembered as more of a fever dream if anything. And right off the bat, because I guarantee I'm gonna get this comment,
This was Robot Chicken for kids.
let me hold your hand when I tell you this. It was. Well, okay, not really, but like, you get that vibe because the show was created and developed by Kevin Shinnick, along with William Gaines. If the name isn't familiar to you, Kevin Shinnick has worked as a voice actor, producer, and writer for Robot Chicken. And Kevin has even gone as far to win an Emmy for his work on Robot Chicken. And funny enough, Mad even received a nomination in that same category later in 2012. So not only did they have that going for them, but also Mad was often playing right before Adult Swim, which meant they could get away with a lot more, which is why people also get that kind of vibe. But why focus on the TV show, Lula? Like, I just really don't understand. Because this show is what got me into the magazines, and like, I've always remembered it fondly for that reason. See, growing up, my mom did not let me watch Mad. Unsurprising, not an unpopular thing, because I see people saying all the time they weren't allowed to watch this show. But I even have this like specific core memory of like seeing their Grinch parody, aka the Grinchy Code, come on like Cartoon Network on Christmas when I was at my aunt's house when I was a kid. The adults had turned on the TV to see what was on for the kids. And when that came on, immediately the adults were mad. They were disgusted. Wait, they were mad?
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
I didn't do that on purpose. But the memory has always stuck with me because I was like, oh, but I wanted to finish that. But the main reason this stuck with me was because I would go to my dad's house during like the week and we would watch Mad together. It became this huge bonding thing for us, and he even went on to introduce me to the magazines by buying some for me when we'd make our trips to the local comic book store. Magazines that I still have. This is not all of them.
You're a little too young for that.
Bitch. 2012. I'm not lying.
I get one of those comments every single video, so. These are not all of them though. I have another pile in my room somewhere just with general comics. I have some that I've taken and I've put them on my wall. I have some that I have just stacked like next to other things as decoration. I even have like current issues. Like, I know Mad shut down, but they revived like a couple years ago, and my dad keeps putting them in my stocking. So they're like holiday themed. I think I have like a New Year's and a Christmas. But we do have to obviously appreciate the iconic Alfred E. Newman on each cover. But even when like owning these magazines and talking about it now when I'm 19, that didn't stop me from getting the vibe at the time of like, oh, I should not be watching this. And clearly it wasn't just me, since they got to push the envelope a bit with their time slot. I mean, I was an avid Robot Chicken watcher as a kid. That is not a flex. And to this day I have to say that like, bitch pudding is iconic. So, you know, finding out that this show was under the same producer was not even shocking. But looking back at the show myself, despite the fond memories that I have of it, I can admit that Mad happened to miss the mark quite often, because their attempts at making jokes within parodies, although they had their moments, strayed too far from the target audience like majority of the time, which caused like clever jokes even to go over our heads. And this can be explained by the fact that, you know, 100% of these parodies were just mashing up one current character, movie, or topic with an older one from before the target audience was born. Or maybe it's something that was around when we were born, but it's something that was not in our age demographic whatsoever. The first instance of this I'm going to talk about is, this show actually came out in 2011, but I remember specifically a Two Broke Girls, Powerpuff Girls sketch being confusing. Personally, I am a huge sucker for like tiny details in media I consume, and something super cool I learned about this sketch was the voice actors for the Powerpuff Girls and the voice actor for him, you know, reprising the role. And while I can appreciate this today, I had never heard of Two Broke Girls when I watched this episode, because I was under the age of 8, so I think that should be telling enough. Parodies like Victorious, CSI Carly, Monsters Community, After Bert, Clifford Field, and the Buzz Identity all had aspects of them that I recognized as a kid, but chances are I didn't understand like 75% of the references or jokes within the parodies because I wasn't familiar with the other half of the parody. I will say, as I was watching, you know, bits and pieces on YouTube for this video, I have to especially appreciate Criminal Minecraft. because although I don't actually remember seeing this one as a kid, I just happened to like stumble upon it in a playlist, but I found it really funny. Like it was great because first of all, that's like the last two things I would ever expect to be like parodied, Criminal Minds and Minecraft. But the whole joke at the end was also about Mark Zuckerberg, which caught me so off guard, and dare I say it was a little ahead of its time. So that's what I mean when it's like, this show isn't really all terrible. We can acknowledge there were things that there's a reason why it was short-lived, but it had its moments because I do find it funny. Like, I'm sorry. Something else I remember being confusing too, which looking back might actually just be a me thing, is the amount of times that Wolverine appeared in this show. It was almost like a reoccurring bit. I swear to God, Wolverine was everywhere. But I didn't know who Wolverine was at the time. And to this, I've never gotten into Wolverine. I could not tell you anything. I mean, now I have a general, like, knowledge. Not even. I know the surface level, the tip of the iceberg. I don't know. But point being, I did not know who Wolverine was. So when those parodies came on, I was especially completely lost. And speaking of that, Mad, in general, did a lot of, like, celebrity parodies, which explains why it was specifically Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. Don't ask me how, I swear to God. I somehow knew that Hugh Jackman played Wolverine. And I've never, like, I could not tell you what Hugh Jackman looks like. I don't keep up, but I Googled it because I was thinking about it when I was like rewriting this script. And I was like, oh, it was Hugh Jackman, wasn't it? And like my jaw actually dropped. Anyway, now, of course, I actually knew a lot of the celebrity parodies, like Justin Bieber, Kristen Stewart, Selena Gomez, Miley Cyrus, and more. But then there were some people they threw in, like, I don't know, Al Pacino, who would make an appearance alongside Alvin and the Chipmunks.
Way to go, Alvin. You crashed our ship and we lost Dave. Now who's gonna look after us?
Hooah! That means hello.
Al Pacino? What are you doing on this island?
And then once again, I'd be completely out of the loop. It is still something that stuck with me, I think for the fact that I was so confused. But also on the other hand, I've never seen Twilight.
I know. Shocker!
Which is kind of ironic because I have like the Mad Twilight cover on my wall just because I think it's fucking hilarious. But even then, I don't remember being confused when they'd reference Twilight. I understood just because of how widely known and popular Twilight is, and still is, to be honest. Hell, there was even a segment called like Celebrities Without Their Makeup. And I was like, did I make this up? I looked it up. And when I tell you, my jaw was on the floor. How the hell did they get away with that? That has to be the most like 2000s thing I've ever seen. Just the concept, or like, it wasn't the 2000s, it was the 2010s, but you know what? But from those examples, it's clear that like my big love from the show not only came from getting into the magazines along with it and bonding with my dad, but my love for the show comes down to those simpler concepts, such as Once Upon a Tune, which in my opinion was much easier to follow because have I ever seen Once Upon a Time? No. But do I need to understand it to like get the sketch? No. The general basis is like easy enough for me to get it, and I did. That's another show that like I could have easily gotten into, but I just didn't. I remember seeing like a ton of commercials for Once Upon a Time as it was like airing new episodes, and they were always like really intense, and they're like, you don't want to miss this. But I just wasn't interested. Focusing back on this parody though, I have to say it was really cool to see a bunch of original Cartoon Network characters back on the big screen for this specific parody, and that was because it was actually in honor of Cartoon Network's 20th anniversary. Once Upon a Tune even like kind of breaks the fourth wall. I don't know if that's the right wall I'm talking about, but basically the premise of this whole segment is like it's actually a nightmare that Johnny Bravo was having, and Mad is explained as a show that's constantly making pop culture references but doesn't actually make jokes about them.
I just had a nightmare that I was no longer on TV, that I was replaced by some show that constantly makes pop cultural references, but doesn't really make jokes about them.
They actually do this in the beginning of the After Bert parody.
1,000 years ago, we left Earth for a reason. I think it was to get away from a show called Mad.
Hello? Is anyone listening to these jokes? Hello?
So I guess they were just extremely self-aware of their show being a bit of a failure in certain aspects. And to me, I don't know, that seems kind of on brand. Another example I recall where I understood enough was Adventure Time 2. Now, I'm not fluent in the Marvel Universe, nor do I really ever plan to be, but the concept of this parody was something where I don't need to know a lot in order to realize what's going on here. Unlike, Hugh Jackman's Wolverine.
That was a lot more confusing.
It's just superheroes like going from dimension to dimension and then they get stuck in Adventure Time. When talking about parodies, I do have to mention Mouse MD here.
A mouse, Doctor? Are you crazy?
Shut up and say
Because this parody's like Mickey Mouse reminds me of the Mickey parody they have on South Park. Same energy, same vibe. I don't know.
Just what the dickens is going on here, huh?
Oh shit, it's him again.
But also when I rewatched this sketch in particular, the top comment literally says, "Love coming back to these and actually understanding the references. If that isn't mad in a nutshell, I don't know what is." Adding on to the point I opened this video on, another reason I feel like things missed the mark would be due to just the movie or the show they chose to parody. I did mention Two Broke Girls, but another example that comes to mind of a parody would be My Little Warhorse. We all know My Little Pony, okay? Whether it's G2 or G6. And it was popular at the time, so I feel like that was obviously something they should parody. It made sense. But the amount of people who have seen both My Little Pony and the movie Warhorse,
slim to none if you ask me.
I mean, specifically kids watching at the time, because I hadn't even heard of this movie until researching this video. I didn't mean for this video to just turn into like me admitting that I haven't seen shit. But when we're talking about this and I'm trying to make a point, kind of unavoidable. In my defense, I've only been alive 19 years. I still have time. So let me know if there's anything in this video I mentioned that's really good and I've been missing out. Anyway, I mentioned this one because I remember watching this sketch back in like 2011, 2012 and thinking, what the fuck do ponies have to do with British people and war? And then to top it all off, they throw fucking Tintin in there, which, oh my gosh, do you guys remember the live action Tintin movie? Which I'm now realizing came out in 2011, just like Warhorse, so maybe that's why they did that. But if we're talking about My Little Pony parodies, even though that one stuck with me for like confusion reasons, I would say the more notable parody, for me at least, was clearly Rainbow Dash and Bernstein.
Did someone say brony?
Crash and Bernstein being popular enough to like get a parody in the show confuses me. But I guess it did have 3 seasons, so maybe I shouldn't be confused. The weirdest part about that show is I remember really liking it, oddly enough. But I'm thinking maybe that was just because there was a puppet. I definitely plan to make a video about Disney XD by the end of this year, just because I was an avid watcher of Disney XD, even though that's technically supposed to be like the boy version of Disney Channel, or it was. I don't know if it's around anymore. But I might need to rewatch the show eventually because I have this itch I need to scratch. And every so often, this show pops into my mind and I'm like, was this real? Did I make this up? Also, my god, McKenna Grace, you need to be stopped. You are everywhere. She's been in everything.
Well, she doesn't need to be stopped. Good for her.
Did anyone else used to want to be McKenna Grace so bad? I used to be so jealous. Enough about parodies though, okay? If we're gonna talk about Mad, we also have to highlight the fact that Mad, it wasn't just limited to parodies, that's just a huge part of it. The show was actually a variety of shorts and segments ranging from anywhere from a couple seconds to minutes. This included things like infomercials that were unrelated or sometimes related to a character that would then, advertise their product. Other times, the infomercials would just be like pun-based. There was also this like reoccurring bit of Mad News, which had this like news anchor guy that was voiced by Kevin Shinnick, giving us like the daily scoop, if you will, which I think it was an opening segment for the show, but due to the lack of episodes online or like full episodes, I was actually unable to confirm that. So if anyone remembers if it was like thrown in there somewhere or if it was an opening segment, I'd love to know, because that's how I remember it, but it could have just been in like earlier seasons maybe. Mad News though is a really great segue into something else. I love the concept of this show. Like, bottom line, this show being animated versus a live action like sketch comedy show gave this show an insane amount of range when it came to animation styles. It wasn't so, I don't know, like cookie cutter like other shows airing at the time, which is not a bad thing, by the way. It's not a bad thing to have a consistent animation style. I just always appreciate when shows kind of switch up the animation style for segments once in a while. It's like a little, I don't know, dimension break. I think it's cool to experiment with that kind of thing. But Mad, you know, the concept that it made sense for the show to do this. But Mad had 3D animation, Mad had a bit of stop motion, which I specifically remember for the spy versus spy segments. I don't know if it was just limited to that, but they had a lot of stop motion with those, and that was really fucking cool because I've always been specifically obsessed with spy versus spy. I want to know in the comments, which spy were you guys always rooting for? I feel like I always switched up who I was voting for a bit. My bias was Black Spy. There were even segments that were animated like in the art style of actual comics and things that would appear in the actual magazine. So they would bring on actual sketch artists, several of the sketch artists, and so that's why if you see their artwork in the show, they were brought on to help the character design for those segments. Also, due to so many people being brought on to this project, it was cool to see like some people that worked on Mad that would later, you know, make it so big for themselves. This includes, but is not limited to, Darren Nefsey, who's the creator of Star vs. the Forces of Evil, or Jorge Gutierrez, who I specifically remember for his Dear Reaper segments from Mad, as well as just his general art style because it's very distinct and I've always really loved it. He's the creator of the Book of Life as well as that Nicktoons show El Tigre. In conclusion, although a lot of jokes were missed, one thing's for sure, this show definitely did its job at making the magazine come to life. I mean, I did just talk about how they brought on, you know, sketch artists from the magazine to actually character design, and that really made it feel like you were in the magazine. But from including these sketch artists to the page turning, ripping, and folding in transitions in between different segments, it's just like a cool aspect of the show that I feel like goes underappreciated, and it's something I think turned out really cool regardless. Ultimately, the collapse of this show, from what little I could find online, was most likely low ratings. No surprise? Well, maybe big surprise kinda, cause this show like just kinda disappeared one day, and I did not know what ratings were or that they exist at the time. I feel like we all have a show like that where it was very short-lived and we're just like, where did it go? And then we forget about it one day. Yeah, and then I wonder why this show was forgotten about. But in hindsight, it's not shocking considering the shows that actually aired alongside. Classics like Adventure Time, Regular Show, The Amazing World of Gumball, The Looney Tunes Show, and more. And a fun fact about Mad is that Mad actually premiered the very same day as Regular Show, right after Regular Show's premiere. So if that information doesn't put it into perspective, I don't know what will. Sometimes being such a drastic standout from other shows at the time, unfortunately makes it really difficult for something like this to stand on its own. Despite any confusion that my younger self had at times watching this show, just like that one commenter said, it's unironically a fun watch, or a fun rewatch years later, now that I as an adult understand certain references. And maybe this is a hot take, but I think it'd be super cool to see this show revived in present day because there's a lot more that could be worked with, and the show's concept really had so much potential. And honestly, I could care less if you disagree with me because Twitter absolutely proved that point with all the fan-made parodies I was seeing in the beginning of March. I would also like to end this video by sharing that there is a Mad Magazine reference in Minions Rise of Gru. Since this is years before any of the events in the first 3 films take place, this is Gru's childhood. And I literally took a photo of it to show my dad because my friends were not gonna know what the fuck I was talking about. Anyway, that is pretty much it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I just wanted to kind of revisit this because I was dealing with a little bit of burnout from my last video because it was such a huge project and it kind of flopped, but it is a really long video, and if you have to wait a little bit to watch it, then that is completely fine and it will be there waiting for you. Thank you so much for watching. Huge shout out to my patrons, and let me know in the comments what your thoughts on Mad are, whether that's the magazine, the sketch show, or you know, the Cartoon Network show. I'm genuinely curious to hear other people's opinions on this show because it doesn't get talked about enough. And I will see you guys in my next video.